I've been very lucky to have a career where people have taken chances on me. I've had these different inflection points, and the thing that I've done over and over again is bet on myself. And at the end of the day, investing and actually running a fund is really all about relationships. Healthcare has an incredibly high information barrier to entry. The amount of knowledge required to invest in this space is both broad and deep. Healthcare has these interesting models where the person who is using your product is almost never the person who's buying your product, who's almost never the person who's looking at the data from that product. The bit of guidance that I got from them was, you already have this platform, you already have this community. That's what people go to these large funds to build. You already have that.
Owen, welcome to the Slice Pod, where we uncover the stories of fresh emerging managers across the early stage venture landscape. You're the founder and general partner of Opal Ventures, a 10 million pre-seed fund investing in startups, building in the infrastructure to expand access to healthcare. You're also a venture partner at Primary Ventures. The first question that we ask everybody is, did you always knew you were going to start your own fund? How did this come together?
I've gotten this question a few different times, and it definitely wasn't my intention to start a fund. I definitely would have gone about the process a little bit differently if it had been. I think the thing that has been a huge thread through my career has been pursuing things that I'm curious about. And that's on the one side. I've always been interested in startups. I've always been interested in understanding how companies work, how companies make money. And on the other side, one of the things that has been a core value of mine has been building and sustaining relationships. And at the end of the day, investing and actually running a fund is really all about relationships. It's about the relationships you have with the GPs. It's the relationship you have with LPs. It's the relationship you have with your founders. And the goal is to create value within the ecosystem and be able to find a way to capture it. And starting a fund is the perfect way to do that, but it's definitely not what I intended to do when I started out in my career.
You started your career as a teacher, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I've been very lucky to have a career where people have taken chances on me. I've had these different inflection points. And the thing that I've done over and over again is bet on myself. I was a teacher. I was a special ed teacher in Washington, D.C. through Teach for America. And I ended up teaching for 3 years, completely burned out, as I think that's the story of a lot of teachers. Ended up going into consulting. And as a consultant was working with large foundations, the Gates Foundation, the Dell Foundation, among others, to design and implement large data systems. So really had a chance to apply some of that educational experience, but use it to learn this whole new skill set around data system design and implementation. And the part that was the most interesting to me was actually like, how do you get people to use these things, right? If you're implementing these tools into these large bureaucratic organizations that are resistant to change, how do you actually get them to incorporate it into their workflows? And so learned a lot in that experience. And I knew that I wanted to work with startups. I was doing some work on the side for an investor in Washington, D.C. And we came across a medical education startup called Osmosis. And this was really one of the big inflection points for me. After we invested in Osmosis, I joined the team. I took the leap into this pre-seed stage, really early stage startup. I was one of the earliest employees, came on in an operations role, and really just used that as the chance to prove myself. I eventually became COO. I led our B2B go-to-market. We captured a huge percentage of US medical schools as paying customers. We were backed by Felicis and Greycroft, and then we were eventually acquired by Elsevier. And between Osmosis, between the opportunity that I got on deck from Eric, those were kind of two inflection points where I bet on myself. It paid off, and the impact on my career and the aperture of what I could do and what I could build widened dramatically.
Is that when the passion for healthcare started solidifying? Was it there and then that you started looking at healthcare and see the opportunity that technology can bring? Tell us a little bit about that. What do you hope to see more of from a venture capital perspective within the healthcare vertical?
I think you're spot on. When I joined Osmosis, I knew very little about healthcare. I had my own personal healthcare experience. I had the experience of my family. I would say maybe the one place where there was a little bit of difference from a lot of folks is that I also saw the healthcare experience of my students, their parents, and these communities that are tremendously underserved by the current system as it exists. The other piece that you mentioned, I think I've always had a little bit of that desire and civic mindedness. As a kid, I was a Boy Scout. I eventually became an Eagle Scout. It's something that has been a part of me and how I think about my work and my place in the world. But one of the things that got me really excited about healthcare, specifically from an investing standpoint, is actually the barrier to entry to be good in this space. Maybe fintech is similar, but healthcare has an incredibly high information barrier to entry. The amount of knowledge required to invest in this space is both broad and deep. And one of the things that I realized On Deck and at Osmosis is that I had this huge advantage when it came to looking at opportunities in this space, both because of the number of companies that I was seeing, the number of conversations I was having, my own experience of selling in this space, but also because I had this huge network of people who were experts in all of these different areas of healthcare who spent their careers working on it. They knew way more than I did about these very specific verticals. And in building those relationships, spending time with them, asking them the right questions, I was able to build frameworks to invest in opportunities that other people might not necessarily see, have access to, or understand. And so a big strength of mine in this space I've found has been actually knowing the extent and kind of the limit of my own knowledge and knowing when I have to reach out to someone else to make sure that I'm thinking about my assumptions or my questions in the right way. And as it relates to healthcare, one of the very specific challenges is around go-to-market and selling, right? So healthcare, actually quite similar to education, has these interesting models where the person who is using your product is almost never the person who's buying your product, who's almost never the person who's looking at the data from that product. You have these really complicated incentive stacks, and getting founders access to people who understand those stacks and how to sell into them earlier in the building process gives those folks a huge advantage. We had 300 people go through the On Deck Health program. 64 companies come out and raise capital. Those companies have now raised collectively more than $370 million in funding from Sequoia, Lux, General Catalyst, Accel, all of the top tier firms. And a huge part of it was, as they were ideating, as they were going through the early stages of building, we were helping connect them with the people that would help them understand how to get to market faster, how to build a wedge that was sticky, and how to drive retention from those early customers.
Why not join a fund? Why not join one of the big healthcare behemoths? Why do your own thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. On Deck, just for folks who might not have heard of them, is a community, and it's really a community of communities for early stage founders. I joined On Deck in January of 2021 to actually launch their healthcare vertical. And so they were interested in creating programming, creating communities. And so that was an opportunity for me to actually go out and essentially be paid to build my network. I feel very lucky that I got to do that. And when my time at On Deck came to a close, I was really at this crossroads, right? As you suggested, one path was to join a fund and bring those relationships of that network to the table at a larger organization. And the other was to start a fund myself. And I had a lot of folks advising me around the table, people ranging from Eric Torenberg, the founder of On Deck, to GPs at much larger funds. And the bit of guidance that I got from them was, you already have this platform, you already have this community, right? That's what a lot of people go to these large funds to go build. You already have that. And if you're to go to a large fund, at the end of the day, you're going to be doing this for somebody else, right? You're going to be leaving a lot on the table. And at the same time, the founders that I've been working with at On Deck were really encouraging me to go out and do my own thing. And what they told me over and over again was, oh, and we wish you were on the cap table, because On Deck was this place that was, as you said, investor adjacent. We weren't capturing a lot of the value that we were creating in the ecosystem. And so the push that I got were these folks around the table, founders, other investors, colleagues at On Deck, being the first people to put checks into the fund and giving me that little nudge over the cliff. And interestingly, when I was making that decision, the scariest moment was the moment before I made the decision. It's all these things that are out there. There are all these possibilities. And making that decision, dropping all the other avenues that I was pursuing, essentially burning the ships at the shore, so to speak. The moment that happened was incredibly freeing. And it was kind of at that point where I was like, okay, yeah, this is the right path. This is the thing for me to pursue.
Healthcare venture funding relies 9, 10 out of 10, PhD kind of founder, very accomplished, big check size, build a team around them, when it's already obvious. And there are a few opportunities there in the market, but there is not that many. What you were saying earlier is that there is more opportunities out there, but they don't get to see the chance of being funded because they don't get to see the traction that it's needed for traditional venture models. I know your program at On Deck was very successful, but you clearly are doing something else right now. So is there any competition?
Yeah, look, there's some phenomenal healthcare investors out there. Some people who are coming in with a tremendous amount of experience, who have network access, things that kind of give them an advantage when looking at the space. There have been healthcare accelerators. There have been quite good healthcare accelerators. United Healthcare has run one for quite a while. And the value of that is obvious if you're a founder, because you are wanting to get access to that ecosystem and learn from the people within that ecosystem. The landscape out there at like the seed, Series A, Series B stage, that's all really well established. I think pre-seed is still emerging. And so that's where we're playing out of this fund. And the reason why I think pre-seed is especially attractive right now is because some of the market dynamics have changed. So number one, larger healthcare organizations are, compared to where they were 5, 10 years ago, much more willing and have the infrastructure to engage with early stage companies. Whereas before, it was quite unlikely that you would be able to sell into these organizations. Now there are mechanisms by which you're able to do it. And we're even seeing with some of the companies in our portfolio, they're selling to some of the largest health systems in the US, and they're able to do it quite successfully. The second thing that is interesting from an early stage investor standpoint is that it's never been cheaper to start a healthcare startup. So when you think about starting a company in this space, let's think about like a tech-enabled services business, which is one that's notorious for being high cost, potentially low margin. You have to set up a clinic. We have an LP in our network that can actually set up a clinic at all 50 states for our founders within 3 months. You have to have the right legal team around you to make sure that you're operating within the regulatory frameworks that are set out for healthcare organizations. We have 2 LPs that were former general counsels at large health tech companies who are able to plug in and support our founders. You have to actually build out the infrastructure. You need an EHR, you might need a patient engagement tool, everything needs to be HIPAA compliant. In previous cycles, you would have to build all of that yourself, right? It's an incredibly expensive tech build out. You can get all that stuff off the shelf.
Pension endowment that is like giving $30 million to Sequoia is not going to get their hands dirty helping out their portfolio companies until they're mature enough to be there. And so like your smaller size and the ability to target smaller limited partners that are interested in actually getting involved in the vertical of expertise that you're focused on gives you value add for the companies, which then creates opportunity to create these companies that otherwise wouldn't see the light of day because they wouldn't have the network of support necessary. This is fascinating. It's like our whole thesis with Slice is that there's a bit of an unbundling of the early stage capital that becomes hyper targeted, where the founder can really choose the partners that they work with and get the help and support that they need rather than a generic platform that could be a YC or a 500 startup, which could never do what you're talking about. Let's be clear, unless it's a B2B SaaS company selling into other startups.
And I think to add on to that a little bit, the hyper-targeted nature of it is also beneficial from a go-to-market standpoint as well. Our LPs range from obviously these individuals who have a ton of experience in actually doing the work operationally of getting a company off the ground. We also have healthcare organizations, right? People that companies can sell to, that they can use to try out some of their pitches and potentially get a pilot. And for founders, we try to be really careful about what we can promise them. We're not going to promise them a customer. We would never promise them something like, we'll help you find your co-founder. What we can promise them is that we will be able to bring the right people around the table in the moment that you need it in order to build faster and make fewer mistakes. And I think in this market where capital is a little bit tighter, you don't get second, third, or fourth chances at building anymore. That is really appealing to founders, and not just first-time founders, but also multi-time founders who are just wanting to get to market quicker.
Where do you find them? This is a pretty small niche. You have a reputation by now for sure, but where do you source these founders? Actually, maybe the question is not where do you find them, is how do they find you?
That's a great question. When I first started Opal Ventures, all of our sourcing initially came from our healthcare community. This community that I had built it on deck, all of these founders were starting to get towards seed. Some of them were approaching Series A. They had become essentially beacons within their own health tech ecosystems that other founders would go to. And when we launched the fund, initially we were getting deal flow because the founders within On Deck Health were sending us their friends who were thinking about starting companies. And through that, we have just been slowly expanding that network. And one of the beneficial things about On Deck Health and when we built it was that this was in the middle of COVID. And so we had this fully distributed community of founders all over the United States that we suddenly had access to. And so when I'm looking at deals, when I'm talking to founders today, over the course of a week, I'll be talking to one founder in Birmingham, Alabama. I'll be talking to another in Austin, Texas, another in Tulsa, Oklahoma, another in Boston or New York. And we've just been able to get this incredible geographic reach that a lot of other firms are not able to get, even with much bigger teams. And that comes down to a couple things. One, the community that I built it on deck, but two, the reputation that I've built with founders over time in terms of being somebody that's worth talking to at the earliest stages of building and being someone who follows through on the things that they say they will do for founders when they meet with them. Right? If a founder needs help with something and I'm able to help with it, that reputation gets reinforced every single day by following through on those promises to
founders. No founders. That's how it works. Yeah. From what you were talking earlier about the opportunities that you invest in, like the structural deficiency of the current system, I'm assuming it's pushing you in a certain direction. And we've looked at your portfolios. We know you put your money where your mouth is. But there is also some stuff sometimes that it's like verges more on the medical and clinical side of the house. How do you diligence those? Is it again tapping into that LP network, into that founder network? And how do you decide in that portfolio construction, how, is this going to be like a pure enterprise, B2B SaaS, healthcare themed type of portfolio? Or is this going to be a much more generic type of approach to healthcare, anything that makes sense at the early stages, very opportunistic? When
I think about portfolio construction, there's a couple of high-level things that we bucketed our portfolio into. And then there's actually how we make decisions on what companies we back. The buckets that we look at are, number one, companies that are helping drive revenue for large healthcare organizations. So this is much more on the B2B side. They're using these large existing networks to drive distribution. And generally speaking, when you're selling into these large enterprises, the number one thing that's important is being able to drive revenue for them versus cost savings, right? They care much more about that side of the coin. Number two, we're interested in companies that are building the rails to increase access to care to underserved populations. Healthcare in the US is a world of haves and have-nots. About 70% of Americans actually have pretty poor access to healthcare, whether it's for geographic reasons, whether it's cost reasons. So there's all sorts of layers that we can dig into there, where even a marginal gain in terms of driving access to care could be an exceptionally large business. Number three, we're interested in companies that are helping strengthen the healthcare workforce. So either enabling more clinicians to stay in practice and be more efficient with their time with patients, or like how are we getting more entry-level people into healthcare? And so the companies that we're looking at have to touch at least one of those buckets, and most of them actually touch two or three, which has been really interesting from our end as we've discovered what we get really excited about with the fund. Generally speaking, we're mostly doing software. It's about 70% of our investments out of the fund will be software companies. And the reason for that is businesses that are doing kind of tech-enabled services or care coordination or care delivery. These are really operationally complex businesses. The founder profile required for them are different. And just fundamentally speaking, there are just fewer founders out there that we believe can build these businesses. In terms of like how we actually make the investment decisions, we are really interested in understanding at this stage what is driving the founder. We want to understand, is this founder going to run through a brick wall to get this company into market? One of the ways we do that is we actually get to spend way more time with a founder than a lot of other funds. Because of the way we are introduced to founders, we're usually meeting them at the point of ideation, like really early on in the building process. We get to spend 4, 5, up to 6 months with a founder before we have to write a check, which is an absolute luxury for a venture fund. And the thing that I'm really looking at is founder kind of speed of iteration. How quickly are they building? How quickly are they learning? And then tied to that, I like to see them fail. Things go wrong all the time in an early stage startup. I want to see something go wrong. I want to have that conversation. I want to see how they react, because that's going to give me the best signal of how they're going to think about building this company. Beyond that, we spend a lot of time also looking, obviously, at the market that the founder is building in. That's where we pull in a lot of our LPs to help the founder and also do a little bit of light diligence. But then also, we want to understand that the founder is the right person to solve the problem that they're trying to solve in the market. Do they have credibility when they're talking to customers? Do they have the unique insight in terms of how they're actually selling into some of these spaces? Can they just get their first customer? That's often the biggest hurdle. And those are all things that we look at. On the clinical side, as we look at things that are a little bit more clinical, when I was at Osmosis, we were building content for medical schools, and we worked with a lot of doctors. And these are a lot of clinicians who had experience working with startups who were entrepreneurial. And I've been able to tap into that network that I've built of entrepreneurially focused clinicians who understand startups to evaluate the clinical efficacy of some of the things that we're looking at. So we add in that extra layer of review, and oftentimes those clinicians then become advisors for the companies that we're working with. And so through all of that, it's a rigorous process, but it's happening over the course of several months. And that just gives us the time to really understand that founder, understand what makes them tick, and just get to conviction about them being an N of one in solving the problem that they're trying to solve in the space.
I think it's very clear what the opportunity that you're talking about is all about. And I think it's clear that you couldn't do this with a $100 million fund. It wouldn't be possible. And I think it's also clear that it wouldn't be possible if you didn't have somebody who is very young and willing to hustle. Because the amount of work that you're describing and the level of breadth of the context switching required within that work, how do you keep it all together? I know that you have a couple of folks that help you out here and there in a semi-part-time capacity, but it's pretty much just you. So I know you say we, but it's probably like the 5 different owens that live in your head. How do you keep it straight? What's the secret, if there is one?
Yeah, I think so. There's a couple of secrets. Number one, I'm very lucky to have an incredibly supportive spouse, somebody who is both able to give me real feedback on whether what I'm doing makes sense or not, but at the end of the day has been just 100% on board with me building this and taking this risk for our family. And what's also nice is that she has a stable career. So we've been able to make sacrifices, but at the end of the day, I have health insurance. I'm not going to get evicted. It gives me that foundation of support in doing any of this. There's been a couple of fantastic advisors as well who have been there from day one, who have really helped me in just understanding what's around the corner. Having those people that can help me make sure that I'm not making any catastrophic errors as I'm building this fund from 0 to 1. And so that's given me a lot of peace of mind. And then I think that the thing that is incredibly important for me has been finding ways to make sure that I'm able to just show up every day. I think so much of building a fund, so much of building a company is literally just about showing up every day, being persistent. And it's showing up physically, it's showing up mentally, and showing up emotionally, right? For every single conversation. I might have a call right before this, which is something going wrong at one of the portcos. And the call after this might be me pitching an LP. And you have to be able to switch between those different things and show up fully present for the conversations at hand. And so I think that has been a big part of it. And then the last thing I'll just say is part of the challenge of raising a fund is that there are not a lot of feedback cycles. The investments that you're making, though, those are 7 to 10 year feedback cycles. The conversations you're having with potential LPs, those could be 3, 6, 9, 12, 18-month long cycles. And I think it's about finding ways to indicate to yourself that the ball is moving forward and creating milestones for yourself that you're working towards, finding ways to celebrate those little victories, because otherwise I think it is quite unsustainable to burn the candle at both ends and try to build a fund, especially in the environment that we're in right now.
Let's talk about that. I was listening to some stats that over the last 12 months, only 12 new emerging manager funds have been raised, as opposed to hundreds on average, every single vintage prior. How was the fundraise? And what would you have done differently now that you're coming towards the end of it?
So I started the fundraise in January of 2023, which was objectively a bad time to go out and raise capital. The market was quite frozen and had a couple of impacts. Actually, I think one of the things that was interesting is that the strategy around focusing on LPs who are writing smaller checks, who are much more hands-on, part of that was actually driven by the fact that that was just my network. Those are the people that I had around me that were excited, that wanted to be involved. I think my first 100K into the fund was 10 checks. These are all kind of just small commitments from people who are just really excited. And so I think that was challenging. I did my first close on the fund right before Silicon Valley Bank collapsed. And we've done this one with AngelList. And unfortunately, AngelList used Silicon Valley Bank as their bank. And there have been these like 2 or 3 moments over the course of building where I just thought, you know what, this might be it. And I think the thing that enabled me to keep going was just the fact that we had some amazing people and very supportive people who had backed us early on. And within 2 weeks of Silicon Valley Bank happening, we actually got a commitment from the group that ended up becoming our largest LP. And so I think it's just about that persistence and being able to push through it. I would say just broadly speaking in the market, it's opened up a lot, right? I think a lot of the uncertainty is now baked in. There's starting to be a little bit more liquidity on the side of family offices and larger LPs. But I think also at the same time, I spent more than a year starting to build those relationships and building that trust, demonstrating through showing, not telling, doing a small first close, investing early, getting some quick markups, and showing that, hey, we're actually getting into the types of deals that I said we were going to get into. And I think that just has made a huge difference on the raise. What I do differently, I guess maybe I would have gone back in time and told myself, hey, in 5 years, you're going to go raise a fund. You should probably start building relationships with family offices now. Other than that, I think the big lesson is that fundraising for a solo GP, fundraising as a first-time fund manager, it's relationship-driven and it's trust-driven. It's helping out with things with no expectation of payback. It's plugging in and providing guidance for folks who may or may not come in and put checks in. And fundamentally, it's about finding ways to expand your footprint for serendipity, both from a fundraising standpoint, but also from a capital deployment standpoint. And that's been something that I was very lucky to have learned at Osmosis, lucky to have built out when I was at On Deck, and has put me, I think, in a position that has made it even possible to raise a fund in this market.
Do you think that the more institutional LP, traditional LP network understands the product that you're selling? Do you think that there is a fundamental understanding that the product that you're building is different from any other venture product that they bought in the past?
Yeah, I think one piece that I think a lot of them understand, and I've been much more deliberate about pitching, has been around access. The idea of Opal Ventures, because we're a small fund, right? We don't have huge amount of reserves. We don't have a follow-on vehicle. It's about getting access to deals earlier that you might not have otherwise seen, and being able to leverage my relationship with founders to potentially come in at Series A or Series B and put in a much larger check that'll be more meaningful. And that has been something that's resonated quite well. Because I think with a lot of these larger kind of institutional LPs, they're interested in that sort of investing, but it doesn't make sense for them to go out and meet every pre-seed stage company and look at the market and make those early bets. It just doesn't work with their models. And so I think that has been an interesting part of it that has developed as we've spent more time with those organizations. But in terms of proving out the offering and what we bring to the table, we actually had one LP as part of the diligence process. They had me come into town and visit them. And as part of me visiting them, they asked me to set up a happy hour. And because they just wanted to see, I think Owen's network really as good as he says it is, as it claims in his deck. And we set up a happy hour with a week's notice, and we got 50 founders there. And I think that was like a huge part of kind of their decision making and coming into the fund, which is saying, oh yeah, no, he's actually able to marshal this network and marshal this community to bring folks together. I think, again, so much of that has come down to showing people what we can do, what our promise is, the things that we have put in the deck, like actually going out and doing it. Like that has been the thing that has gotten these folks convinced.
The last question, tradition around here is, what is that we didn't talk about that you were dying to share, that we're gonna hang up the phone here and you're gonna be like, damn, I really we got ready for this and they didn't ask me?
Oh man. So there's two things, right? So one is on the firm building side, one of the things that was a learning for me has been just how important it is to just show up in person. And a lot of the success of my fundraise has been me reaching out to people and saying, hey, I'm going to be in X city on this day, would love to hang out. Just showing up in person, spending time with people, getting to know them, getting to know their families, what they're interested in, what they're excited about, just like really building those genuine, meaningful relationships. That goes so far. It both being able to raise a fund, but also being someone that they're going to come to if they have questions or if they have things that they want help with as well. And so I've found it to just be really wonderful and bidirectional. And so much of that has come down to just spending time in person with people and not treating it as if it is a transactional process that you're doing. The second thing I'll add is I was hoping that he would be on the couch, but he's asleep right now. My closer is my dog. I have this little mini schnauzer. His name is Teddy. He is absolutely adorable. And during LP calls, he has this habit of just walking back and forth on the couch and laying down. And it honestly, my guess is that it just humanizes me a little bit. Maybe it makes them realize that this is like my actual background and not a Zoom background. But I think that goes a long way just towards finding those points of connection with people.
The value of a human touch. Yeah, that's wonderful. Owen, this is great. Love the conversation. Loved your story. You represent smack right in the middle of this new generation of emerging managers that is going to be written about in history books. Thank you for being able to explain what is the value add of a former operator and hands-on, multi-hat wearing Swiss Army knife type of person that gets on a plane and spends time with the founder over a sustained period of time, who is always going to be cam on when he's taking a pitch, when it's never going to ghost somebody, and all of the bad cliches that you and I have experienced.
Thank you for this platform and the time. This has been wonderful. And I think to your last point there, so much of investing at this stage, being at this stage of company building, it's a joy, it's a privilege. I'm very lucky that founders have trusted me to be a part of the building of their organizations. And from my end, it's the place where our incentives are most aligned. And I'm really excited about the journey ahead.
I could talk to you for hours. And maybe one day we'll do a Lex Friedman version, 9-hour long podcast. But we're heading into a close, literally and philosophically. Where can people find you? If I'm an LP, if I'm a founder, if I'm a fellow emerging manager, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
The best way to get in touch with me is just by email. So I'm owen@opalvc.com. You can also catch me on LinkedIn. I'm posting there occasionally. I am sadly not as engaged in Twitter or X as I used to be, but DMs are open there as well.
Sanhu, what did we miss?
That was an awesome episode. Thanks, Owen, for hopping on. I was just curious, what is the meaning behind Opal Ventures?
So to start off, I wanted something that was not my name, and I wanted something that was terrestrial and it felt old, but was approachable. And opals are one of my favorite stones. I love the fact that they are different as you look at them from different angles. I could afford opalventures.com. And then after I made that decision, was talking to my dad, who had spent some time in Australia, and he was telling me about he went to this opal mine, and it's literally just individuals in holes cracking open rocks. And it is such a perfect description, I think, for kind of what early stage venture is like. You get this rock, you don't know what it's going to be like, you don't know what's inside of it, and every now and then you crack one open, you're like, oh my God, this is something special. And so I think there is something really poetic about that.
The image in the Australian desert of a tiny little person digging a dirt hole on their own, looking for that rough gem. It's super powerful. It's really cool. I love it. Best way to end it. Thank you both.